should then know who's who, and then we are going to get started. Okay, maybe just starting. I'll start. I'm Martin Hagen. I'm working for the Senator of Finances, and there I'm responsible for digitization and all central IT questions. I would say hello, Sven. Sven and myself, we've been working in similar function for over 20 years, so it's really nice to see you again in this context. And we had jointly worked on this topic, so that's really great. Okay, I'm Johann Bizer. I'm the head of board of Dataport. So digital sovereignty is a topic that is particularly dear to my heart because our role as IT service provider is to make sure that public administration functions. I'm Peter Ganten. It's already been said that I founded the Univention company in 2002. Since then, I've been the managing director. I have experienced a lot of interesting things with Univention, more and more with the public administration and also in education, and more now also with projects going beyond education. And we all have been collaborating over a longer period of time. So I'm happy to see that we're sitting here and discussing these matters. And Mr. Thomsen, Sven Thomsen, I'm working for Schleswig-Holstein, and as Martin Hagen said, I've been working in public administration over a longer period of time, and as the participants of panel, I started quite early to look at digital sovereignty, but also open source and administration, and to support this technically, and I'm really happy to have you here. Okay, we quickly changed. See, I'm Adriana Groh of Open Knowledge Foundation. I would like to moderate, and I would like to start with the first question, and very boldly, because we use this term all the time. So the question is, what is digital sovereignty, and what do you understand by digital sovereignty, and can one have different views, or is there one definition, and we only have to decide which one is the right one, or are there different ones? Well, it's like at a ball. You can have different views, and in the end, it's always about the same. At least this is my perception of digital sovereignty. It's always about the question of not getting dependent, at least not too dependent, and making sure that whatever we are responsible for is functioning and working and functions well. And so making sure that public administration is working well. And one could also talk about the digital sovereignty of a company. And there's the same. So the production means have to work properly. And if you then outsource to China, then you might have a problem. So digital sovereignty is also for a company. And then there's a different focus if you think about the digital sovereignty of a citizen who's interested in making sure that his data are safe. And he or she wants to decide by him or herself that these things work well. So it's always the same. So independence, that's the key for with regard to different people or entities? Yes, and I would say that if you look at these three groups, administrations, companies, and citizens, there are basic principles, I would say, basic principles that always come together. That is transparency, that one has the capability of controlling things. So independently on whether you're a state, a company, or a citizen, you somehow have to understand what is happening with data. You have to be able to understand how these are processed. And you have to be able to influence this. At least if this is happening in a way that one doesn't like. But that's only one side. And the other side, which goes along with this, is that for citizens, you have to be able to self-determine this. That is, that you are able to say, I want this to be done in such a way or such way, and not every citizen is programming his or her own app. But for states and companies, this is important. You also have to be able to shape things. That is, that you yourself are also capable of saying, and in public administration, this is particularly true, where one says that they are so slow in the digitization of their processes, so to say that they are really somehow in silos, and that they are trapped in those silos, and this is why we cannot really move them forward and why we cannot really promote things. So the one word that I would like to pick out is self-determination.
Yes, but self-determination is only possible if I can follow up on it. So transparency, independence, self-determination. I think we're all going the same direction, but we have another 2 hours. Well, if we continue like this, then well, I would like to introduce the term ability to act as well. With all emotion that comes into play with open source, my role as a CIO is to keep administration capable to act with its IT. Of course, I like open source, the open source approach, but if the IT doesn't work, that's a problem no matter what. I have to make sure that that public authorities in Schleswig-Holstein can act, and digital sovereignty means to have the choice, to have the possibility of taking decisions. That's what we expect. So it is the responsibility of IT departments of public authorities to ensure choice, not to become dependent from individual suppliers. So to stay flexible, become more flexible. Well, I fully agree. The 2 core terms are avoidance of dependence and your own ability to act. And for public authorities, that means sovereignty. That is what you want to achieve. I want to be able to make my own decisions. I want to have a choice. Some days ago, I read an article where a scientist from Berlin structured it in a very good way. How you can structure your ability to work. We have an infrastructure, a technical infrastructure that we all need, and we are dependent on this technology, the servers, and the software that runs on them. And the question that comes into play, of course, do we determine what software and servers we use, or do the servers and software we use determine what we can do? That's one level. Then the other aspect is, as it has been said, that the US model and the Chinese approach on the other side. And the question is, where do we stand here in Europe? Are those decisions that other political systems take for themselves and take for us, or do we take our own decisions here in Europe? And the third aspect, which has a very important role to play for public authorities, is the sovereignty vis-à-vis private suppliers. So the question of whether we buy the software that we need, or do we use the software that's available in the market? Do we determine when we want to update, when we need to migrate to a new database? We've heard that again and again, that public authorities say, well, we don't want to migrate, but somebody decided that, some company decided that we have to. So I can't make a decision. I just have to live with it and accept it. And that is, it really is something that I find problematic, the relationship between us and private suppliers. Well, you anticipated something that I was going to speak about. Mr. Thiel's article. He's a professor in Frankfurt for political sciences. I was going to mention this article as well, and I would like to add to the fact that he also criticized the definition of sovereignty because it still has a dimension of not only of independence but also of delimitation, so creation of borders. And I wrote down take back control. That's the claim of the Brexit promoters. So he called it a project of hegemony. And that's a question we seem to agree. All of us seem to be agreed that digital sovereignty is a good thing. Are we blind to the fact that this term still has a touch of hegemony coming from the past? Well, that's a problem by Mr. Thiel. We're not talking about sovereignty, we're talking of digital sovereignty. And you have to discuss it in a context. We didn't come up with this digital sovereignty. That comes from different political framework conditions. Martin Hagen just mentioned it. Free trade is over, and we're in a kind of a trade war between different blocs. That is something we didn't dream up. It's a framework condition that is in place, and then the term of digital sovereignty is an interpretation that enables us, vis-a-vis this situation of dependencies that have emerged, to move out of these dependencies. Of course, I would like to see free trade. I would love to see China and the US to stick to the rules of the World Trade Organization. I would like to see that software licenses are not commingled with foreign policy issues, that people in the US might disapprove of our policies here. But if that is the way, then we have to develop strategies that enables Europe, and we should have done that in the past, a long time ago. But we should enable ourselves to do industrial policy, and that is not possible with proprietary software. We can do it with European companies that offer proprietary software, or with an open source strategy. And what we find is a structure of medium-sized companies, IT companies that support open source strategies, such as Peter Ganten's company, and that is an asset. And under these political framework conditions, we strengthen these companies and we try to use them for public authority. So I kind of reject this, I object to this discussion of terminology without any consideration of the context. So the digital sovereignty is just a term that we use there. Well, the Brexit idea was something that I introduced. That was not in the article. So, to paraphrase what you said, you would love to not to have this geopolitical ring to this term, but that's it. Well, if we build open source, we don't mind anybody else using it in other regions of the world to defend their own independence. I'm not too far from Mr. Thiel, but I can understand Johann's intermission. That's his problem. I can understand where he's coming from. I have to say, in the internet scene, the tech scene, there's still this idea that this technology can help overcome power structures, etc. And that is not the case. I never understood. You can always dissect it, but it keeps coming back. And you'll find it in politics in Germany, and maybe that is why it's an important topic to talk about this. If digital sovereignty should be interpreted in that way, that some established structure, be it national states, be it software companies, could be overcome by some fictitious concept of freedom, then I'm opposed to that idea, because there's no proof that this has ever worked. And the existing power structures, both political and economic, always impact. They impact now, they impact on the internet, and they will continue to impact. And this is something we have to consider and work with. But I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing. Power isn't a bad thing. The abuse of power is a bad thing. But that is why we have democratic structures, and that's what we do in the West, and that's what I am committed to. We need the structures that allow us to work with the contents that we stand for, and structure the infrastructure such that you can rein in power. And there's a lot of interesting discussion going on in this context. Sorry, I'm in the home office. My kids are just printing out something that's a bit noisy, so I'll have to speak up a bit. We have to be careful that in the discussion about digital sovereignty, we always have to point out that isolationism is not something that is required. Digital sovereignty doesn't mean isolationism. It means to extend your options for action. We oftentimes hear that we have to have a German company that offers this, because then only then can we be sure that it works properly. So sovereignty, digital sovereignty, doesn't mean restriction to the German or European markets or power structures. That refers back to what Martin Hagen just said. We have to make sure that monopolies or dependencies may have an impact on our choices. So that's a different type of abuse of power. So even if you are an advocate of digital sovereignty, you have to make sure that you're not perceived as an isolationist and someone who wants to disconnect from international innovation. It's just a question of where you get your innovation from and how you participate in it. Well, that's an important point. That's why it's important to discuss it this way before you labor under the misconception that everybody knows what you're talking about, and you might talk at cross purposes at the end. Yes, I would like to underscore what was just said. It's not a question of autarkic approaches. It's not about isolationism. It's about overcoming unilateral dependencies so that we can communicate with our partners in other countries at eye level. And the partner that I do business with, that is always the way in all areas of business. My partners need to know that I have other options as well. I wouldn't ever cooperate with a single bank only in as a business. It's multi-sourcing. That's what it's called. But that's what we've done in IT. In the IT business, we've always said there must only be one. And then we were surprised that this one turned around and squeezed us like a lemon. So we need market principles that apply to all, and that all, of course, apply equally to companies from the US and China, as long as they play according to the rules. And likewise, I would like to be able to sell my products in the US. And I don't want anybody telling me you're not allowed to sell anything here anymore because you're from Germany. And it must not be the case the other way around either. Even if it sounds like we've overcome this, but I hope that we turn back to open world trade. And I am an optimist in this context. Well, that was very interesting. Well, thank you very much. I would have touched upon it later on, but we're in the middle of the debate already. Next question, what are the priorities now? We're talking about digital sovereignty, but if you break it down into individual steps that need to be taken here to achieve this, the question is, which are the first steps to be taken? There's a lot of talk about schools right now, home office working. There's a lot of questions that are being raised of how this can be done. So are there any other areas that we need to take a closer look at, or do we have to look at everything at the same time? Well, we must not make the mistake of dismantling all the positive structures that we've established already in terms of process standardization, for instance. So processes that we've organized in order to be able to making jobs available to large numbers of staff members of the public authorities. So we have a lot of proprietary products now. We won't throw them out. We have an asset here. We're capable, and we do that in the states where we work, in Schleswig-Holstein and Bremen and Hamburg and Saxony-Anhalt. We can make IT infrastructure available to staff members like industry does it, as well, with procedures, processes, etc. So if we implement open source products, we only exchange the content, but we might, ideally we leave the processes unchanged. So we only change the content, not the processes. That's important. That's very important. What's also important is that we don't only talk about open source when we should, we could, we might. No, we actually do it. That's the important sea change that we have started since the beginning of 2019 and in 2020. Within the shortest period of time, during the pandemic, we're able to make an open source video conferencing system available, and we will make it available in a scalable way. We've done that. We're doing this. We're not only doing this at the groupware level, we also do it at the infrastructure level in data centers. We don't do it ourselves alone, so it's not this autarkic approach. We're not running into this trap, falling into this trap. We're doing it in a group of public IT service providers. It's not Dataport alone that does it. We actively cooperate. We don't say, hey, this is Dataport and only Dataport itself can do this. No, the asset that we have created is being made available to others. And then there are other suppliers who make available their strengths, and so we strengthen each other. Through cooperation, we gain strength. And the last aspect that we'd like to underscore is that this is really something for public authorities. Who is driving the IT development? This IT development, is it industry or is it the public authorities? No, it's the public authorities, actually. And that is something that I really believe. I always believe that public companies are not necessarily the worst. So pooling resources and then actually doing things and pioneering things. I'm looking at you. Well, I could continue. I'm speaking from the point of view of public authorities, at least such as we organize them here in Bremen. There are three different approaches. One of them is that we need to change the tendering process in cooperation with the federal level and the other states. Of course, the EU has structured a lot of tendering aspects, and we do it on a European level. But what we're not doing is, in Germany, we have very little understanding of the fact that software needs to be replaced after 5 years. I learned that when I went on a trip to Denmark. I don't know if it's true, but they claimed that this is what happens, and there was some indication that they actually do it. The fundamental idea that projects are limited to 5 years, even for core IT processes, and that we are willing to move to an unknown competitor after 5 years, and that is something that in the public authorities in Germany we don't do at all, because if you don't strive for autonomy in this way, you will never be able to reduce your dependencies. That the second aspect is that we need to establish an architecture, that is such that this world of apps, these software developers, they're in a structure where everything is online, and they don't even talk about which are the future devices that they use, the future collaborators. And that's the opposite of what we have in public authorities. So these open source and the fan club scene don't really realize that they can't simply go on the market and say the public authorities should be open source because I'm a developer and they should be like me. That's not realistic. We have a lot of medium-sized companies that make specialized software. They're companies with 300 to 500 staff members, and there's no alternatives. In some areas, there are market leaders that have 100% market coverage or 50% market coverage. There's no alternative, and we depend on them for accounting, for instance, finances, etc. That's our situation. And next to modification of the tendering practice, we need to have a structure that we require, allowing for interchangeability. And then thirdly, because Dataport is our service provider for Hamburg, Schleswig-Holstein, Saxony, Anhalt, and Bremen, that we build new things such as the video conference that we don't do with market leaders, that we create with our partners here, and we can do that with our video with our partners here creating this video tool, so we can say we are capable of using third-party suppliers, and it really doesn't matter whether it's proprietary or open source. That's a different issue than digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty is much more important that I have the choice now who comes along with which business model and based on which infrastructure, built based on which software. I don't care. I say pay my licenses for one model or the other, and it's okay for this because they provide a service and it needs to be paid for.
Though I have to say that this can turn into a problem because if you have one specialist producer who's got 100% market share and is proprietary, then there isn't that much of a freedom of choice. Because then I do have a difficulty to place this order with somebody else. I would have to redevelop it from scratch, wouldn't I? Well, you have to explain this to me. This is a wish. No, this is not a wish. This is a remark, something that I see. Well, in the market of specialist producers and the competition, so would a request of having to offer this in open source increase the competition? Well, in open source market, very often we have a situation where specific products prevail. And at the end of the day, there's only one Linux kernel. There are no 5 different ones. However, there are different companies which really offer support and services for this. And that's a huge advantage, because as a user, you can then switch without having to change the product. Not like for proprietary software today, all interfaces, all data sets need to be translated or transitioned to a different product, and the processes are not working that well. The other supplier has specific features, but at the core, we would talk of the same software, and that's a huge gain. And I really would maintain that if the public sector said the critical specialist processes from point X onwards will only be bought as open source, all the suppliers who make open source available will continue to supply, and I believe they will continue to earn good money. But they will put you into a different position, because if they get it completely wrong, for example, or if they go bankrupt because the managing director really was mad, then you've got an option, and this is something that you don't have today. So independence and scope of maneuvering on different level. So in the choice of the product, but also on a level which is above of this, higher up. That is, I'm independent of the product, so I can choose different suppliers I would like to collaborate with without actually having to change the procedures. And I saw Mr. Thomsen nodding. Yes, I nod in approval. But what Mr. Ganten just said is indeed something that we have seen in open source. That is, you really decide with your feet. So if a dominating project is not really doing well, then quite quickly the situation is that somebody says, I'll do it differently. And if they then do it correctly, or if this one does it better, then they will move. I think open office versus LibreOffice, then you see how this can work, and we've seen this also for other open source applications. Another topic that I noticed very personally is it is less comfortable to have a digital sovereign design of your own IT. I would like to give you one example. That is with regard to innovation and also how innovation should be organized. If I'm dependent from external parties, then I don't have to do this, because then I just wait what the producer will provide us a new one. And then you say, oh, I need to update because there's a new innovation and there's a new feature. And this is more difficult and more challenging if I position myself as digital sovereign and also on an open source basis, because then I have to make sure that, in part, that this innovation will happen. It's not as easy where a large manufacturer will say, oh, in version whatever, we will implement such and such, and you just say, oh, great. No, in this field, you then would have to do it a bit by yourself. And this is no longer a thinking of product-based and release-based, but you really have to have a 5 to 6 years approach. And in Schleswig-Holstein, we've got a report how we are going to do open source, and we just made it public. And it's very important to tell the public that we're not talking about a year's program or a 2 years program. No, we talk about innovation cycles that we need to organize, which will last 6 to 10 years. And within these 6 to 10 years, we also have a long-term infrastructure planning. And also in infrastructure, there are dependencies. And Mr. Jans and myself, we were at a meeting where we have seen that directory services is not interesting, but it is an inherent topic if you want to become independent of specific manufacturers. So within the infrastructure, there are inherent dependencies which are not visible for users, which, however, are also important to consider when you talk about digital sovereignty. So the infrastructure, the basis, has to also be maintained in such a way that you still have a choice. And then the question is, what is education and what are the important topics? And here the CIOs are asked to have an inherent or pursue an inherent modernization. For example, the switches, do I have to buy them with this manufacturer? Isn't there somebody else? Do I have to use my directory service on Microsoft Access Directory, or aren't there any other services that are much better? So this is a different challenge to an IT manager, as in the past, where I was just buying products and would just go to manufacturers. And for IT management, this is simply a different challenge. So you have to plan long lines, and you have to plan large interlinked projects in order to allow for innovation to happen. If you listen to how we discuss this matter, then the question comes up, okay, we need a structural approach, structural problems like tenders and how contracts are placed, but we also want to get into doing. We want to bundle our forces. And can all this be done simultaneously? Or should we say first structures and then we build up? Or do we have the time or the resources also in public administration? Because the requirements will grow. And the more you bundle your forces, that is, that you bundle from internally as well as externally. So how should we approach this? Well, I would say the North tells the Republic how we are doing this. And this, since 2004, we've been doing it because since then more and more states have seen that one IT service provider is allowing this to do this. So Dataport has to ensure that the joint interest will be brought forward, but they also have to guarantee that individual clients and owners have different speeds and different foci. And this differentiation can turn into a strength because one might be ahead in one topic and another one might be ahead in a different topic. And all the others always benefit from this. So this is a constellation that in 2020, 2021, we have benefited enormously, not only with regard to digital sovereignty, but also with regard to the implementation of online services that are provided in different form, online and also in collaboration. 6 states collaborate in taxation IT. 4 states have the same police procedures on Dataport. So this is not only open source configured, but that one IT service provider is pushing this forward and is also sharing of work. And this in a very intense collaboration. It's an enormous strength. And this is why we dare to really attack and move towards attack. We just do it and we don't talk about it. And in the northern parts of Germany, you say don't talk, just do. And this is a strength that you can use, and you can scale it with a partner that is, I can scale it up for more than 1 million users. Somebody else should copy it. So this is the North showing how one should have done. And this is why I say we need to implement and really speed up and not really talk this. And the structural work, well, you could also, accelerate, but this is quite narrow. And if you start moving one element, 5 others start to shake. I come from the south of Germany, so I don't know how the north does it. Well, what counts, and this is what Johann Bizer said, you don't have a master plan. There isn't one master plan that one can implement. But what we notice right now is that the drive that has developed comes from network. So more and more people would like to collaborate. And one might be a bit more dynamic and saying, okay, this looks quite good. Let's do it this way. And it's not the classic waterfall approach. And according to plan, in 7.34 years, I'll be done with this exercise. So we have the COVID crisis, but also the IT approach on the path of open source. Through both, we've seen that one can quickly has to move towards innovation and new ideas. And you can only do it in a network. I would maintain for myself, I couldn't do it all by myself, even if I had a single service provider. So even us in the north, we couldn't do it if we only relied on Dataport. So what we see is that the effects that we see, are coming from the established network. So it shouldn't be anything so inclusive. Everybody should have a say. But those, and I completely agree to Johann Bizer, those who are active should collaborate. And this is a model that has proven successful. And just to prevent any misunderstanding, we don't say at Dataport that 200 to 400 people do open source in corseting. But last year we went to the market and said, we need support in the market for open source. We need your advice. We need your developmental activity. And if you operate, we would like to get your support. We would like to benefit from your experience. And what did we gain? We gained industrial partners who, with regard to processes or support or open source software, like Peter Ganten of Univention. Well, we gained them and they support us, and we gained industrial experience. And that a partner like Open Exchange, they've got 4 million email accounts in France. This is industrial experience that we use. As for Germany, we also have the industrial experience, 11 million email accounts. So we don't reinvent something, but we've got the strength of a manufacturing depth. We've got the competence of Dataport, the demand of Dataport, and this in combination with the experience of industrial partners who are included, this makes us strong. And we said we can support on a network of German and European IT companies with open source experience. We don't reinvent the wheel, and this is actually what is so cool about it. And this speaks against this model or this misunderstanding, and Sven said it, against the misunderstanding, oh, there are people sitting there who are acting completely freely and develop something, and then somehow generically it's suddenly there. No, no, no. This is industrially organized, and this is possible. And then you can generate something in the market, and others can use it as well, and this on an industrial scale. Mr. Ganten, would you like to add something? Well, two things maybe. First, I would like to go back to the question as to what is important right now, on which areas do we have to pay attention to. And I think there are two aspects. One aspect is what are the choices, the options that I've got on the market, and the other aspect is where are network effects, and where can I predict network and platform effects that at the end I can't get out of. For example, in administration or in education, if I start to put all data, that is everything that my administrative staff or students do when they look at text or video conference. If I put everything in on a cloud, and then allow them only to decide who can draw which conclusions out of these and which analyses will be made available, then implicitly I make sure that suddenly on the other side there is a knowledge which then will not allow me to generate applications without having access to this knowledge. And this is something that I will not get out of. And this is something that I need to understand now and have prepare myself, even if there are still choices and options today, and have to work against this. So I think that this is a very important criterion. And there is these PwC studies with the Federal Ministry of Industry. So with regard office and workplace productivity, such a dependency is developing, and we have to pay attention to this. And with regard to cloud services, we are also seeing the emergence of such a dependency. And in our own Source Business Alliance, promoted by Sprint D and others, and now probably of the ministry, we've got the Cloud Stack project. So these are the core areas that we really have to look at. Other areas where data cannot or are not stored, so the tools that everybody can exchange, these might be less important. And coming quickly to the other question and answering that, I think it's absolutely important or necessary what Johann Bizer said. Don't do it all by yourself. We can't sustain this. We have to organize it in such a way that everybody can participate in this, because competition is operating in a global market, and they draw resources from a global market in order to survive in competition. And this is why we have to position ourselves in such a way that whatever we build, even in the United States, even in other European countries, that it can be used everywhere. And there are different levels. And just today, we announced that we, as one of the core groups, building this together with Dataport, that we get together and say, okay, if you as a business only would like to get the software, you can also use it, and Dataport will benefit from this because it gets better. But if you want to use it from German computer centers, safe, then we can't do it. And then Dataport is exactly right. So these constellations will have to be built, otherwise we won't be successful. I think that I here would like to add a question that participants at the end. Why is the German government or German administration not using more German open source or cloud suppliers? Well, you would have to ask administration. I don't get the question. Well, I will now answer as part of administration. Well, you have to see it innovation cycle. So if today, and I don't have to do it, but it's obviously the Parliament of Schleswig-Holstein, for example, we should use open source software, then this is not a resolution from now on immediately, but just as for all other innovations, that is once when we do something new or in major changes, this is when we're going to start using it. And this is what Johann Bizer just said. So it's not about coming up with a revolution and doing everything anew, but it is shaping innovation in such a way that we will become more sovereign in a digital sphere. And for Schleswig-Holstein, I can say that all calls for tenders that are going out now, open source software and suppliers opting for open source are preferred. And not in the sense that we're just saying are preferred, but obviously we are the master of our criteria. We will say you will, in this spreadsheet based call for tender, they get more points. And for those who are still only license-based and closed source, there we say, okay, we support companies to put your product onto open source by saying, or tell us what you need if you want to get open source. Maybe the state of Schleswig-Holstein could be a partner. That is within 2 to 3 years, and then for the next call of tender, you could be open source. And we could use the market power of the state of Schleswig-Holstein to do this. So we call for tender. We would like to have open source solutions. And if you don't have open source solutions, then you could also apply if you show us a way how you want to become open source. So this is also something that needs to be borne in mind. And innovation in public administrations is organized in use cycles. If I've bought something, then I don't look at it for 4 to 5 years. So we have to understand where we are in innovation. As for video conference, and then later it will be telephony in Schleswig-Holstein. And I don't think that we will not introduce closed telephony, but only open source. And it would be wrong, I think, in our current market situation to go for closed solutions. But I just would like to explain, if you say something, then it's not immediately done, but it needs years of implementation. But the question with regard to the administration, the fact that we sit here shows that we are on the path in the other direction, because we cancelled licenses in office area. And this is for Schleswig-Holstein and Bremen. We asked Dataport to develop this, and we benefit, we in Bremen administration, benefit from Schleswig-Holstein, because there the education administration has already initiated system, and we now network it with our systems and use it in administration. We in Bremen, because we didn't buy a video conference system and we missed it, but now we have an open source video system that we use. So we're already on the way, on the track. But one point is also clear. The dependency is extremely high right now, and everybody who is managing IT has to also consider this dependency. Some software that is used right now is really good, genuinely good, in Office as well as for budgeting, but also for other specialist softwares. And if administration does not perform because they don't use the correct software, then the public anger is unlimited. And this is something that you have to see. And then we come back to the beginning of the discussion. The sovereignty is something that we will have to work for, because right now we are not sovereign. And we're just making the first steps, and this is what we discussed. And I can understand everybody who says it's not fast enough. And I also take on the question whether we couldn't do a bit more and move more. And without any doubt, this is true, but it will remain a long path. But we can also say that we've already made the first steps. Okay, the one question that has been supported quite a lot is easy to answer. So several Hamburg and Schleswig-Holstein administrations will use Nextcloud Collabora. Okay, this is a bit specific. So could we say, yes, this is moving towards open, and yes, the web client I just spoke about, Phoenix, it consists of different they're all open source, but different components, and they've got different functionalities, and we offer this. And we already use it, and we also use it for customers. And Martin Hagen just mentioned one module. This is the online component and the video component, and we will further develop the stack, and we just implement it in Schleswig-Holstein. So we do this. So yes, we do it. Well, I didn't want to give you the individual product names, but this is exactly what we're doing. So as administration, belonging to the Dataport network, you can use it. And if you are interested in this because you are an administration outside of this Dataport circle, then we will find also paths to connect them. So we are also open to friendly other IT administrations to offer this so that they can do it. And this is what I meant when I said that there's a completely new quality of collaboration. So we get out of this silo thinking and we start this basic idea of an administration cloud where we would like to collaborate uniformly, step by step, as Mr. Thomsen has just said. And for Bremen, I can clearly say this because I'm responsible for this. Our contract with Dataport is that next to the Microsoft Office client, an alternative desktop client will be offered, which then will be and can be used in Bremen administration. And this is certainly not a 100% strategy, so not changing everything completely. And I think that would be the wrong introduction strategy. That was my personal experience as to what happened in Munich. So I really don't think that's a good idea, even if it's difficult to bear. So a top-down approach where we have a lot of acceptance problems that have to be considered. And we say that we will develop sovereignty that is really develop a scope of maneuvering which then will allow us to set up an alternative. That's the big performance that we want to see, and this is what we asked Dataport to do. And for the workspaces where this is possible and where users decide to use this client, we will then use it. Okay, so the path is open, but move fast and break things. That is the Silicon Valley. Maybe it's more move slow and build things. Move fast and break things. Well, 1,200 employees in financial services. Try to explain to them move fast and break things. So we really have to relate to reality. And to be honest, this is not only true for administration, but this is true for any organizational unit. So we cannot really break down the computer each morning and reinstall it and then say, you employee, now use this. This is not the way the world works. The support question, anybody who's in this business, support is important. It's the biggest cost factor, the support and management of employees. It's not the licenses for the product. And this is actually the core of our job. That is to get IT started. Move fast and break things. But this in Silicon Valley, this is not even true for Silicon Valley. And Amazon and ABS or Microsoft or Mike Zuckerberg even put it in perspective. In a small startup, you can do it. But if Amazon broke anything, then it couldn't work, not at all, in many areas. So from a specific size onwards, or certain size onwards, this is no longer possible. So once you've got a certain number of employees, this is not possible. And in administration, this is true. And we define our European or German path in the European or German administration culture. I don't have to revolutionize the world. This is not my job. My job is that German administration, which is good, can even get better, and this through good digitization. And this is what we do step by step in a very focused approach. Okay, then I would like and have to leave this as wonderful concluding remark because we're already 5 minutes behind time, and we took away the coffee break from everybody, and I could have added the same amount of time. It really was fun, but I now pass the floor for the next guest who will join us via the video link.